Shoulder guard. Pull. Left face. Order! Order! Right, face! Pull out!
Thank you, everyone. Please take your seats. Now, Mayor Menino could not make it today. He regrets not being here. However, we do have our Boston Fire Commissioner, Roderick Frazier, here with us, who will say some words on his behalf.
On behalf of Mayor Menino and the Boston Fire Department, good morning, and thank you for attending this event. Although we're commemorating this year the 71st anniversary of the Coconut Grove nightclub fire, which occurred here, box 1521, November 28, 1942, we're all participating in a solemn and historic moment in the ongoing history of the city of Boston. I say ongoing because the work of the fire department continues, improvements in fireground safety continue, and improvements in fire prevention continue each and every day. This fire was a horrific event in the history of the city and the nation. The death toll was 492 lives lost, and the carnage witnessed by clubgoers, firefighters, and police officers would haunt them for years. The nightclub owner was sent to prison, but the lives and lives of many others lost in this fire and other fires nationally brought about change in fire department operations, national standards, improvements in building and fire code, and regulations that have made our city and the world a much safer place to live. As a result of the investigation of this fire, we now have specific laws for building occupancy, exit ways of egress, maintaining those egress ways unblocked, panic hardware on doors, and non-flammable coverings, to name just a few improvements since then. This street memorial is a testimonial to the sacrifice and also a thank you to those who lost their lives here in this neighborhood 70 years ago. I think the fact that the community took such a leadership role in this project is particularly commendable. Even more than 70 years later, people everywhere know about the Coconut Grove fire, its heavy loss of life, and the long-lasting effects and changes that are brought about by incidents like this that ultimately have improved our safety and the safety of residents everywhere. I ask that you please keep the Boston Fire Department in your prayers and do a great job every day protecting the city. It's my hope and prayer that a tragedy like this never happens again anywhere. Thank you for coming together to remember this event, and please take care and God bless. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'd like to present to you our Mayor-elect, Martin J. Walsh.
very much. And during the campaign, when we were running, Paul Miller, Mike Hanlon, and Ken Marshall asked me to come down, and we walked by this site, and they explained the history to me, and that was probably about 6 months, 7 months ago, and I didn't think I'd be here 7 months later as the mayor-elect to talk about what happened. Thank you. I want to also welcome the survivors of all the families, the survivors that are here, and also all the family members. We're joined today by Mayor of Braintree, Joe Sullivan, and his wife Barbara, and her family, whose grandfather, Michael Fitzgerald, lost his life on this site. We're also joined here today by Representative David Harrison, who lost family members as well on this site. And the commissioner stated it well about what changed after this fire. Unfortunately, a lot of times it takes a tragedy to have change. And you know, when I came down here during the campaign, and I stood at the plaque where the door was, I could just think back to that night and that day leading up to what the fire meant to the city of Boston and what it meant to a lot of different people, and about the excitement that happened in this location and how solemn it is. And being here 71 years later, commemorating that incident that evening and thinking about the changes of what happened with that tragedy in the city. So I'm honored to be here with the families. I want to thank you for being here. In particular, I want to thank the survivors for being here today. I understand that it's the first time that some of you, or a couple of you, have come back since that terrible evening, and I want to thank you for coming here today to share with us your memories. Also, the commissioner mentions, I want to thank the Boston Fire Department. Oftentimes, when we read in the newspaper a lot of criticism about the fire department and about our public safety officials. And you know, we don't really think about it until a tragedy happens, actually what they do for us. As we're all running out of a building, they're running in to protect us. So on behalf of myself, Mayor Menino, Mayor Flynn, I don't know if Mayor Flynn's here as well either, I'd like to thank the Boston Fire Department for your continued service for the last 70 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, if you look behind me, there are 3 large easel boards. And on those boards, there are the 492 names of the deceased, individuals who died in that fire or died as a result of the fire. At this time, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence to remember the lives lost in this very site. Thank you. Now I'd like to ask for the survivors to please step up here. This is Mr. John Rizzo, the survivor of the Coconut Grove fire. Mr. Rizzo will share some words with us, but first I would like him, along with our Mayor-elect Martin J. Walsh and our Fire Commissioner, Roderick Frazier, our Veterans Affairs Commissioner, to please step up and unveil Coconut Grove Lane. I'd also like to introduce our Boston Transportation Department Commissioner, Tom Tinlin. Please step up. Police Commissioner Evans, please step up. Now, Mr. John Rizzo, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, everybody. My name is John Rizzo. I was the survivor of Coconut Grove. I just came here to thank Mayor Menino for inviting me here, and I really appreciate it. and I just want to thank a few people that were very kind, and that's Monica Marshall, Mike Hanlon, and Paul Miller. And these ladies here, they've done a very great job today. And I just want to thank the Mara family and Tony Mara. He was a 16-year-old boy, and when he got old, he was the man that put the education. He's the man that started to put that plaque on for the dedication. And I also want to thank Mayor Menino again, and I thank everybody. I thank you people for coming today in respect of your families and friends. And I want to thank you very much. And I'd like to thank Mayor Menino again and all the other people. I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, one other of our survivors, John Heyman, unfortunately could not be here with us today. He's in his 90s and he wasn't feeling very well. However, we do have Ann Gallagher, the youngest patron in Coconut Grove. She has an amazing story to share with you. Let's hear it for Ann Gallagher.
Oh, wait. I just don't want to shriek at people. I just want to say I'm so happy to be here today. It was a great loss in my life, but so many good things in a way have come from out of this. But
Photographer.
I'll never ever forget that day. I was only 16, and we had gone to the Boston College Holy Cross football game and then to the Grove for dinner. And all of a sudden everything was happening, and I discovered that I did get out. I have no idea to this day, and I'm now, I made the mistake. I said I was 57. I'm really 87 there. Out of the bad comes the good too. This has been so important to me because I had so many questions that I've held all this time that I wanted to really be here. And so I want to thank everyone so much. It's a beautiful, it's a sad day, but beautiful. Thank you.
Yay!
Thank you, Ann. Now we have a third survivor here with us who's going to share a couple of words with us. His name is Marshall Cole. Marshall Cole. Let's hear it for Mr. Cole.
42 years ago, I was a tap dancer at Coconut Grove. I was a chorus boy, believe it or not. And a year later, I was fighting the Japanese. But anyhow, the whole story goes, I made it over the roof. Thank God for that one. Me and about 12 chorus girls. We got off the roof. I forget where the building is here. And there was smoke and fire. But like I say, I was very lucky. A lot of people didn't make it. God rest their souls.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Now we'll hear historic remarks from Paul Christian, Fire Department historian and former Boston Fire Department commissioner.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. This is certainly a historic event. This site, I'm happy to see, is being preserved for future generations. Over the years in my career at the Boston Fire Department, I cannot tell you the number of times I have brought visitors to this very site. fire officials from the United Kingdom, from Ireland, Australia, Japan, former fire commissioner, the late John O'Hagan, New York Fire Department. First time he was in Boston, I was assigned to take him around. He wanted to come to this site. This is truly hallowed grounds we stand on today. And the marking of this street as Coconut Grove Lane will ensure that future generations come here to contemplate and think of what took place here on that horrific night. We don't dwell on the horrors that went on, but we like to focus on the good that did come out of this terrible event. As one stands here today, though, the significance of this street is this line that follows right back to that dwelling behind us. You folks right here in the forward part going down towards the garage are actually sitting in what was the caricature bar. For about 30 feet back, or the back 2/3, was the main dining room. For about halfway back on that fence along the wall is where the terrace was. That is where Buck Jones, the cowboy, was sitting with the movie executives when the fire broke out. Going from this fence line towards the south was the foyer, and the revolving door was down there. Below this area here was the Melody Lounge where the fire broke out. Further over into this garage was the new Broadway Lounge. Behind us you can see the remnants of what was Broadway, and that was where the fire finally extended into. The events that night were all put together to form a perfect storm for a fire condition. If one or two of those items had been changed, this tragedy would not have occurred. Probably the most significant was the exits that night, the means of egress. From down below the Melody Lounge, as the people came up the stairs, the doorway at the top was locked, it was shut, so none of the patrons could escape without paying their bill. Coming forward into the foyer as the fire burst up, came forward was the terrible revolving doors where so many people were trapped. The fire broke into the main dining room, into the caricature bar. Windows along Charlotte Street to the back were blocked. No one knew they were there. There was no way out of the caricature bar except to come back through to the main lobby here, the foyer. The fire spread rapidly beyond the stage in the main dining room and went right into the new Broadway Lounge. There the exit doors opened inward. There was no way for those people to get out. Over 1,000 people were in this main dining room, a room about 60 feet by 60 feet square. The interior finish that night was a major factor contributing to the spread of that fire. Down in the Melody Lounge where the fire broke out, there was fabric draped across wood furring in the ceiling. There was leatherette seating. There was combustibles throughout the building, things that aren't allowed today. The overcrowding, as I mentioned, was horrific. Throughout the night as people arrived, they weren't turned away, they were brought in. They were set up additional tables. The place was totally packed. The notification of the fire was delayed. People didn't know about it. There was no alarm system. People in the Broadway Lounge, when they first heard the cries of fire, thought it was a fight. They thought a fight had broken out in the club until the flames broke through. One thing that has always impressed me throughout my career in the fire service, still impresses me today, is the speed and velocity at which fire travels. Anyone that's ever anywhere and you hear a fire alarm, take action immediately. The speed of the fire that night was absolutely horrific. More significant that night too was the absence of sprinklers. It wasn't until 61 years later, the horrific Station nightclub fire down in Rhode Island, the state of Massachusetts was finally able to get a law in place requiring sprinklers in occupancies such as these. Other catastrophes have similar events taken place over the years. We only have to look back to 1977, the Kentucky Beverly Hills nightclub fire, similar results. The MGM hotel fire in Las Vegas in 1980. It's very clear that the lessons have to be reminded to us quite often. The fire commissioner back in 1942 was William Arthur Riley. Just to let you know what the mood was in Boston back in 1942 in November in the Boston Fire Department. A little known fact was 2 weeks earlier, there was a 5-alarm fire in East Boston in Maverick Square. 6 Boston firefighters were killed in the line of duty. On the Tuesday before this Coconut Grove fire, a memorial mass was held at the Holy Cross Cathedral in the South End, not too far from here. So the mood of the Boston Fire Department was extremely somber in that late November. 6 firefighters were dead, dozens were still in the hospital. One of those hospitalized in Boston City with a fractured skull was Captain John B. Stapleton. He would go on to become chief of the Boston Fire Department and father of Fire Commissioner Leo Stapleton. Leo Stapleton told me when he went in to visit his father the next morning after the fire, his father said something terrible must have happened. There was a lot of commotion in the hospital last night. Commissioner Riley started an inquest in to see what happened the very next morning. People of the city were angry. They wanted answers. One of the first witnesses was from the NFPA. He cited incompetent enforcement of existing laws, political influence in building permits, and careless management at the site. Changes took place immediately. Commissioner Frazier has referred to a few. One of the first ones was the banning of revolving doors. Later they were re-allowed. You'll see them in buildings in Boston, but they're only permitted when they have swinging doors on each side. Immediately the Boston Fire Department established the position of department chemist, where all materials must be tested before they're allowed to be put in any places of assembly in Boston. This has grown today, and today the Boston Fire Department has full-time fire protection engineers on staff to make sure that these regulations are followed out. Additionally, the fire department started nightclub inspections, where we would send inspectors out to the premises to make sure that the doors were operable, that the overcrowding wasn't taking place, that the aisle spaces were being maintained. Another important feature that took place following the Coconut Grove fire was given the authority being given to the head of the fire department to cause inspections. At the time of the Coconut Grove fire in Boston, you had many governing authorities: the licensing board, the building department, the police department, and the fire department. In 1945, the state law gave the fire department the authority to enter any premises in any reasonable hour to investigate causes of conditions which could contribute to a fire or to hinder people from being able to evacuate the premises. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, 10 years ago, we were able to get the sprinkler law in place, which has saved countless lives. The lessons of the Coconut Grove are clear. They're just as important today as they were in 1942. And it is only through constant vigilance that tragedies like these can be avoided in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Christian. Finally, we will hear from Dr. Kenneth Marshall.
Good morning. Survivors, Mayor Walsh, friends, all of those of us who are here to memorialize the people we lost, but also to celebrate the things that came out of this, as the chief was saying. And I brought with me one prop. There's no way to do a PowerPoint here or whatever. But my son, who's sitting over here, always gets me ingenious gifts. And knowing my passion for this because of my personal history, he still has not told me how he got it, but I have a copy here of the 1942 November 30 edition, Monday morning, of the New York Times. And on the left-hand side is the entire story from top to bottom of this tragedy. And putting it totally in historical perspective on the right-hand side, and I hope to share this with you at the reception, is the story of World War II, Churchill, and the theater in Europe. So I think I'll just pass it around amongst our people here. So the thing is that is the historical perspective, and the pithy remark at the bottom of Mr. Mara's plaque over there in the sidewalk that this is a phoenix out of ashes. We are really the phoenix, and the medical story certainly is part of that. We are indebted to the authors that came afterwards and have told the story, and particularly also to our more current journalists. Dante Ramos, on this exact day a year ago, wrote an editorial which said tragedy and not quite forgotten. Hopefully with this event he can rewrite it and say tragedy and remembered. Professor Fox, who's here with us today, also had written in the Globe 3 years ago a similar story, and actually Dante Ramos wrote another editorial this last August, keeping this flame alive. And we're indebted to the major authors. 3 of the 4 of them are here, are represented here. John Esposito, Stephanie Chereau. John is up from New York. Stephanie Chereau is at Bunker Hill and talks a lot in the local area. And we have the Benzaquin family. The original book written was in 1959 by Paul Benzaquin, who became a major public radio personality, and his widow is here with us today, and I believe his son is as well. This is indeed a phoenix out of ashes. We're delighted to have the survivors here. One other survivor, John Heyman, could not be with us because he was not feeling well, but he was pulled out by the Boston Fire Department through a window. As well as all the things that the chief just talked about, the other side of the coin is the enormous progress that was made in medicine. And that's what I am humble enough to stand here and tell you about. Just the names of the medical professors and people involved and the medical personnel are a staggering number of people. And we have a couple here that I'll mention today are represented. Now you ask, what is my connection with this? My mother was off the boat from Ireland and went to the City Hospital School of Nursing, stayed working there, and she was on duty actually that night on the surgical service at the City Hospital, and took care of many people, including Clifford Johnson, perhaps the poster boy for the fire with his tragic ending, and also perhaps even Dr. Jerry Slate's grandfather. Jerry Slate is here, a former colleague of mine from the Mount Auburn Hospital. His grandmother perished, but his grandfather was injured, and I believe my mother may have even been his nurse. I want to tell you that I share the responsibility here of reporting all these medical things with my medical colleagues here, and we're honored to have here today Dr. Palmer Joe Bessie, who is standing over right under that lamppost. Dr. Bessie is the president of the American Burn Association. By total chance, that society moves around the country to different major cities, and this year in March it will be here in Boston, and Dr. Bessie came up for a site visit and visited this site himself in September, and is very pleased to be here with you to have this celebration. Also here representing the medical community is my good friend Dr. Constantian down from Nashua. Mark has been president of the Northeast Society and the New England Societies of Plastic Surgery, is nationally and internationally known, and shares a particular interest in one of the aspects of the medical progress that was made, which I'll mention later. And it's great to have Mark here with me. Also, we have Matt Donlan, who's the chief of the Shriners Burns Institute, who's standing back there, and has been a friend to several of the patients and people. And finally, we have some of my colleagues, and forgive me if I've missed some, but Pat Marasco is sitting right in front of Dr. Bessie. Pat is a plastic surgeon up in the North Shore, and his mother was a nurse at the Mass General Hospital and took care of the burn patients. She is sitting with him. Mrs. Marasco there, I think. Now, there are really 4 basic medical advances that came out of this fire. They are absolutely, to my perspective, monumental. And I think you will agree at least with one of them, because it's something everybody knows something about. But there was, this basically was a watershed change in burn care. Burn care in the 1930s and before was done by doing rapid excision of burns and basically using dyes and so on to try to prevent the rest of the fluid loss. We have here today a representative of the change, and that's Sarah Cannon Holden, who's right over here to my left. Her dad And Dr. Cope at the Mass General instituted a concept of early burn fluid resuscitation with a demi-delayed debridement and then grafting. So enormous changes came in the treatment of burns. We still use those things today. And this particular episode in history is directly responsible for it. Number two, at the city hospital, Sam Levinson was the chief. He was the fellow that designed a mask that was used in World War II, and he was the one that pushed the concept of early intervention in pulmonary injuries. Pulmonary injuries are what probably did in 80% of the people that were lost in this fire. And he recommended early intubation and early pulmonary support. And that changed the whole modality of how that was treated. The thing that everybody will agree was a watershed thing in history is related to the advent of penicillin. Penicillin was discovered in a bedpan, as you probably all know, in 1929 in the UK by Fleming, for which he was knighted by the Queen at the time, or King at the time. He basically turned it over to the studies at Oxford, where Florey did further studies on it, and it was feared because it was thought it would kill patients as well as bacteria. It was brought across the Atlantic in secrecy to keep it from the Axis powers because it was thought to be something that was going to be revolutionary in caring for injuries. And our federal government, in a moment of wisdom, farmed it out to the Merck Labs in Rahway, New Jersey, and they were producing it for the troops in 1942. However, 2 days after the fire, a call went to the Merck Labs, and it was brought up by guarded convoys of state police from New Jersey, and it was used for the first time in the civilian population for this fire. So we can attribute the onset of the use of penicillin to this particular episode. Finally, many of you who do know the geography of the city of Boston know there's a very monolithic looking building somewhere between City Hall and Boston Garden. It's called the Lindemann Center. The Lindemann Center is now dedicated to the treatment of addictions of all kinds. Well, Eric Lindemann was the psychiatrist at MGH and elsewhere who wrote all the papers about this fire and the grief responses. And in association with that, a psychiatrist who had come here from Austria named Alexander Adler wrote the first paper that can be identified as the onset of a particular, or a knowledge of a particular disease process from which so many of us still have after effects. Her paper was dedicated to the concept of understanding neuropsychiatric disorder, and what she was describing was PTSD. So I'm a Vietnam vet. We always blame the Vietnam War for the onset of that disease process, but I think we can attribute at least the knowledge of it to this particular episode. So there are really four major things that came out of this, and this indeed is the phoenix out of ashes that Tony Mara was describing with his three pithy words at the bottom of the plaque that is down the street here. And we're really honored to have the Mara family sitting directly across from me. Now my other connection to this is, and I know Mark particularly and Pat Marasco will appreciate that, this, you know, a phoenix refers to rebirth. And I got particularly interested in this field really primarily because of a burn patient of my own at the city hospital when I was there as a house officer. And by the way, all my professors had been house officers at the time of the fire. So this is sort of historically got me interested. Then I had my own personal experience. But the word plastic surgery, everybody thinks we put plastic into people or we spend our whole day doing facelifts. Plastikos in Greek means to remold, a rebirth, if you will. And so that's the other connection I have to this, is that this really, for me, is a bit of a phoenix. And I know Mark particularly would appreciate that. And finally, I'd like to thank the officials of the city for really encouraging this to happen. The Public Improvement Commission that approved this with the blessing of Mayor Menino the encouragement actually of Mayor Flynn, who I talked to several times, and finally Marty Walsh, who came here and stood here and saw really what the chief has just referred to as hallowed ground. It's wonderful to have the officials understand how important this is to all of you and to us. And my final comment is about the person who made this possible, and that's Hilani Morales, who's been emceeing this. This would never have happened if Hilani had not actually put her mind to it. And I'll tell a funny anecdote about this. When the three of us met with her, she looked at us and she sat there with her pad of paper and took all sorts of notes and looked at us and just sort of shook her head and said, I'm not sure what we can do here. And we were not there, but I am sure she went home that evening and sat down for dinner with her husband, and her husband said to her, "Do it." And the reason he did was her husband is a firefighter. And so she has thrown herself into this and has helped all of this and helped Mayor Menino understand. There he is. She's helped all of us in so many different ways. She's worked so well with the neighborhood association, with the developers, with the manager of the hotel here, and he's been so kind as to help stage this, and all the abutters and neighbors, and really wended our way with the help of Mike Hanlon, who has worked in City Hall. He worked for Kevin White, and finally, of course, with my other colleague, Paul Miller, who lives here. He owns property right here on the street, and he lives on the street right next to us. And so the thing is, it's sort of all the three lemons lined up together, and that's how this all happened. And we want to thank Hilani profoundly. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. Finally, we will hear from the Boston Police Department Gaelic column of pipes and drums, and they will play Amazing Grace for us. very much. Now, everyone is welcome to please join us for a small reception right next door at the Revere Hotel, and it'll be from 11:30 to 12:30 p.m. If you'd like, the best way to get there is walk down Piedmont Street, down this alley, and take a left, and you'll make your way into the main ballroom. I'll see you there, and thank you so much for being here today.
Great, just found it.
All right.
Yeah.